Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's Grid Object webinar. For those of you who haven't joined us before, we do record these. We're going to post this up on the website usually within a couple of days. And for this one, the project that I work on this afternoon will also be posted. We had a couple of technical difficulties in the morning one, and I think I figured those out. So what you see today or in this webinar is probably what's going to get posted up on the website, both the slideshow and the InduSoft project. For those of you who haven't joined us before in this type of webinar, I can't hear you. So if you have any questions, put those in the chat panel or the Q&A panel. We already had a question come in. Thank you for the question. Related to, well, so let's just say this, without giving away names, Chris, your question is appreciated, and we'll follow up after the webinar with you directly on that. That's not something I want to answer in the public. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started here. And again, just some more logistics. There is a follow-up survey. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know if there's a topic you'd like us to cover. We've got over 150 webinars up on the website, just about every topic that you can imagine. But if you want to see more on a particular topic or different topic, let us know in that survey. Also, give us your shirt size, and we will send you a free T-shirt just for joining us. And also, there's a spot on the survey to let us know if you're interested in co-hosting a webinar with us. Get some exposure for your company, get some free advertising out of that, and we'll get your name out there and show other people what you did, how you solved the problem with InduSoft Web Studio, and hopefully save some time, energy, money, and made a quality product by using that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, put those into the chat panel or the Q&A panel. Let me get a few of these things out of my way here. Hopefully you guys can see my full screen. My name is Scott Courtier. I'm Senior Technical Sales with InduSoft. And what I'm going to do is give you a brief InduSoft introduction, not too many slides. I don't want to overwhelm you with PowerPoint, but I'm going to relate it to some of the things that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Then we're going to, let's go back here. Then we're going to talk about the grid object, using it as text data source, class tag data source, and database data source. And then the real reason why I'm doing this webinar today is talk about a few of the advanced tips and tricks on how to use the database data source and some things that I found out recently and thought, hey, it'd be kind of neat to show everybody these tools for that grid object. And then we'll hopefully be able to show you the SMA support for the grid object. So with that, for those of you who don't know what InduSoft is, maybe were handed the product and said, hey, go build something with this, and maybe you didn't make the decision, you don't know all about InduSoft, what is it? Well, it's a very full-featured HMI and SCADA software. It can be very low-end and very high-end. It's very easy to use, yet still very powerful and very flexible. And it can be used on and run on PCs, industrial PCs, embedded devices, mobile devices. And for the longest time, InduSoft ran on really any Windows platform, as you can see down here at the bottom. But now we have runtimes for Linux and VxWorks, among others. And with our thin clients, now you can also view those on Safari, Chrome, Internet Explorer, any HTML5 compatible browser. So really kind of neat and full-featured and very, very capable from the mobility standpoint. Before we get into that, let's talk about portability. You can develop your project once and deploy it on really any of these operating systems. The mobility part of this comes into being able to use any of our 3 different types of thin clients, and most recently, within the last several years anyway, this SMA thin client that allows you to view on tablets and smartphones, really any device that you can use, Internet Explorer, Chrome, Safari, any HTML5 browser, you can view and interact with your screens with security. And we've been building into that, and we've got, I don't have an exact number, but maybe about 95% of the objects converted. And we're working on converting those last few percent, and I'll show you that the grid object is now working in the SMA client. The interoperability piece of this means we can really talk to just about anything, not only PLCs, but robots, temperature controllers, motion controllers, barcode readers, really just so many different things. Databases, cloud-based architectures. There's a protocol we have a driver for called MQTT. It's kind of been the de facto standard for the Internet of Things or Industrial Internet of Things, maybe also using OPC UA, which we have clients for now as well. So with all of that, that lends itself to having your project give you productivity, reliability, and security all in mind when you develop those projects. So again, I talked a bit about the portability, meaning you can develop once and deploy to any of these operating systems, often with little or no changes whatsoever. Recently, I did a project where I had a customer that had Windows CE and Windows Embedded Standard 7, developed their project for Windows CE, deployed it on Windows Embedded, let them view it on an iPhone and an iPad, and developed that once, and they were pretty happy with that. The mobility part of this, we have these 3 different thin clients, and again, I'm going to point out this SMA thin client, and I'm going to show you the grid object on Chrome when we get a chance. So what is this grid object? Well, the grid object allows you to read and write data in a tabular format from whatever the data source is configured in the object. And those different data sources there's 3 different types of data sources. It's either text, a class tag, and if you're not familiar with what a class tag is, it's kind of a structure, and database. And some common uses, you can use this to view and or write to CSV files, which I'm going to give you an example for. If you're not familiar with what a CSV file is, it's often called comma-separated value or comma-separated variable file. And it's just a text file with commas in between what would normally be the columns or the fields, if you will. And sometimes it's used to interact with a class tag. Or with a database, you could query the database, you could write information to a database. We even have a webinar that we did recently, and there's a recording that I'll point you to on using the grid object to create and interact with recipes if you don't want to use our recipe functionality that's built in. So the text data source is going to be the first thing that I'm going to do, and we're going to use this to read and write a delimited text file. Now, the reason I called this a delimited text file instead of a CSV, because you have a choice when you configure this. You get to choose, is it comma separated, is it tab separated, space, semicolon, or other, where you can put your own character in here, or combinations, is it comma and space, etc. It's not only CSV, you get to choose your delimiter. And there's also a couple of other options for checkbox and picture, which I'll show you here in a minute. But let's go ahead and let's go open up a version of Notepad here, and I'm just going to create a simple text file. Now what this is going to be is I'm going to make essentially 3 columns. I'm going to put an overly simplified version of an overall equipment effectiveness, or OEE, where we might have the names of machines. So I'll do machine A, and we'll just have a couple of integers here simulating our uptime and our downtime. So I'll just put 11, 22, and then I'll do machine B, and I'll do 33. Oh, got to separate that with a comma, 33, 44. And I'm just making these unique so that you can see how they come into this object. Machine C, comma, 55, comma, 66. So when I save this, I'm going to save this in, you know what, I don't have my project created yet. So let's go into InduSoft Web Studio and create a project. Here you can see that I started a grid webinar morning. So let's create a new project for grid webinar afternoon. And I'll choose the local interface, 1500 tags, and go full screen here. This webinar is not supposed to teach you about how to develop projects, but we're going to talk about the grid object. So now that I have that project folder out there, I should be able to save my, which one's not that one, it's the other one. So we'll save this in my project folder. Now this is going to be here under my projects. We'll do grid webinar afternoon, and we'll just save it in the project root folder because this is overall equipment effectiveness, we'll just save it as OEE.text and save that in there. And I should be able to go ahead and close that out. Okay, so now we're going to put a screen together here, and I've right-clicked on screens, created a new screen. And I'm going to put that grid object on the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and configure this to read from that file. By default, you can see it's defaulted to text file, but there's other choices for class tag and database. Ignore this other one. That doesn't really mean anything. It's just something kind of special that I have. So text file, data source settings, we're going to go, this is that screenshot that I just showed you with the delimiters. We're going to go browse for that file, and not in the morning version of the webinar, but the afternoon. Here's the OEE, and we'll say OK. And it is separated by commas, no spaces, no other delimiters in there, and we'll say OK. Now we just have to define how the columns show up. So the first column is machine name, and that's a text type. The second column is uptime, and that's a numeric type, so we're going to have to choose numeric. And the third type is downtime, and that'll also be numeric. And let's say we don't want to choose the machine type to be input enabled, but we'll leave the uptime and downtime, and just to show you how that works. So now it's very simple. Let me save this screen, and then I'll make it the startup screen. We'll call this main, and make it the startup screen. And when we run this project, it should read from that file. And there it is, machine A, B, and C, uptime, downtime, and their respective columns. And now just to show you that we can write to this, and let me just choose one of these columns. I'll choose downtime, and we'll write 123, hit enter. And if I go to open up Notepad, and I point to that file, which is here, and you can see that it has written that 123 into that downtime machine A spot. So that can be a very easy way to manage a CSV file if you need to. And CSV files, if you didn't know, are easily imported into Excel. So that's one way to do this. Now, when you're using this grid object, in this case, we've read from this text file and brought the data into the object. The data itself is not in tags. It's in the memory of this object, so to speak. And if we needed to get this into tags, there's a pretty easy way to do that. So what I'm going to do is go back to the development environment. And if we look in this object under Advanced, there's an export section down here that I can export to a class tag. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with class tags are kind of like structures. And for example, a lot of times when I'm teaching a class, I'll give an example of tanks or a vessel. So for example, you could make a class for a tank that had level, temperature, pressure, contents, and you could reference that in different ways. You could even make an array out of that so that if you had multiple tanks, all of that whole structure would come along and be suited for that particular tank. But in this case, for OEE, for overall equipment effectiveness, I'm going to make a class. So let's go here under Global Classes, Insert a Class. We're going to make a specific one for OEE, and we're going to have the members of that be the machine, and that will be a text to data type. So I need the string, and then I'll have uptime. That'll be an integer, and then I'm going to have downtime. That'll also be an integer, and I can save that. Now that's not yet a tag. That has only defined that COEE class. Now I need to make a tag out of that. So let's make a tag called OEE, but instead of being an integer, Boolean, real, or string, we're going to use that class definition here. And so now I've got that OEE class tag set up. And so what I'll do is on this object, I can tell it here under Advanced on this grid object that we're going to use this class tag OEE, and we're going to trigger this in InduSoft Web Studio. The word trigger means something. It basically means changing a value. It's not only false to true transition, but it could be true to false transition or incrementing, let's say going from 45 to 46. So I'm going to make a new tag here. We'll call it grid trigger. say that that's an integer. And what I'll do is I'll make a button next to this. We'll call this export. And I'll just make a command, and I'll make this in VBScript that'll take that grid trigger. Notice the IntelliSense is finding that for me. And so I'll make grid trigger equals grid trigger plus 1. So that will increment the value of that by 1 every time I press this, which will cause this to then export the values into this class tag. And once I do that, then I'm going to put another grid object on the screen. Now, I'm only doing this to show the export of this, and then I'm going to make the other grid object that use that class tag. You don't have to do it this way. If you have a class tag that's standalone, you don't have to export from one to get into the class tag so you can view it in another grid object. I want to tell you that those are completely independent operations. For this one, I'm still doing the text file, but I wanted to show you that you could export into a class tag. And then very independent from that, but convenient for me because it just works the same, is I'm going to set up this next grid object to read from that class tag. And the data source settings is going to be the class tag itself. That's what I set up here in this data sheet view that used that class as its kind of definition there. And I'm going to read 3 columns from that: the machine name, the uptime, and downtime. And once I do that, I think, let's make sure that I don't have this open anymore. I should be able to, now I have to define the columns. And just so you can see that these are different, I'll call this MACH instead of full-blown machine. Now this member is the column, the member within the class. Now what I defined over here in the class are these members, and you can see that I have machine, uptime, and downtime. So I have to match those, and we'll do machine, and that was text. Oops, did I change that label? MACH, maybe I can cancel on that. We'll do up as the label, but then it'll be uptime for the actual member. And then we'll do down, or DN, and then downtime. I'm trying to show you that the labels are independent from the member names. And for these, it's not text, it's numeric data type. And we'll say OK. And now what should happen when I run this is, so now this object, this grid object is empty, and I've read from that text file into this object. And now when I do that export, what you should see is this data coming in here. Now, I did the same thing this morning, and I'm not quite sure why my data didn't show up in my first column. I don't remember if I fixed that or not. So let's see, what did I do here? Member 3. I don't know what I did. So uptime, downtime, machine, numeric. I'll try to think of that as I go along. If somebody sees that I did something wrong, let me know. Let's take another look at this grid trigger. No, I know that worked. Oh, so I'll try to troubleshoot that as we go along, but if not, you get the idea of what's going on. So let's go back to this one that's based off of the text file. Let's redefine, maybe it was this input here. I don't think that fixed that, but maybe it did. Let's stop my project and run that again. And no, that didn't get it. So I'm not quite sure why that didn't do that. But what I was able to do this morning is point to that OEE here in the database SPY. And let me do this. Let me go to OEE. I'll go to the member here, machine, and OEE machine test, and that shows up in there. So I'm not quite sure why that wasn't showing up in there. Maybe it's because it didn't make that an array. Let's here. So let's go into data sheet view, make that an array of 3, and we'll stop this and run it again. Sorry about trying to troubleshoot in front of you. I'm getting those values, but I'm not quite sure why that machine column isn't showing up. Machine name, machine, did I mistype something? That's totally possible on my part. Still don't know what I'm doing there. So, but anyway, you get the idea of how I can export this into a class tag, and then separately and very independent from that, import the class into this object. Now, the next thing that I want to show back here in this object is if I change these columns, instead of the downtime being numeric, what if I change this to picture? So I'm going to say OK. And now in the text file, if I change that text file to, let's open up our project here. And let's open up this text file with Notepad. And if I change these values here to be the name of a picture file, a graphics file, and let's just go get those because I'll forget to do that, I'm sure. So when I teach training classes, I often have this training folder here, and I have a folder called Stuff for Training. And I have a bitmap that has a little screwdriver and wrench, if you can see down here. And then I have made this kind of very roughly red around this. So I have maintenance red and maintenance.bmp. So I'm going to copy those into this project. I'm just going to put them right in the root folder. If you're doing a web-based project, you'd probably want to put them into the web subfolder so that your web server can find them. But for this, it's just the idea of how this works. We're going to show you here. So here I'm going to put maint.bmp, and I'm going to copy this. And for the second one, I'm going to put maintenance red. And for the third one, I'll put just maintenance again. So it's going to reference those bitmap files that are in the project folder. I'm going to save this. And I can't do this because they're currently being used by InduSoft. So let's do this. Let's cancel this. I've got a couple different opportunities. I can close this screen. I can shut down my runtime. I think if I stop my runtime, that'll be enough. And let's see if that works. File, save. Okay, that was enough. So my runtime was holding a copy of that kind of hostage. So if I run this, now I've changed that to the picture type, and you can see there that I've got the picture that I want in that. And you could change that during runtime depending on your file name, and maybe have a thumbs up, a thumbs down, an OK, a circle with a line through it, whatever makes sense for your process or your machine. But just to show you, it's much more flexible than just text. Another opportunity is to configure this. Oh, let's open up that screen again. To configure this not only for a picture, but for a checkbox type. Now what this is going to do is write a Boolean, either a 0 or a 1 in that column. And let me open up the, I'm going to have to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to have to stop my project. And I accidentally hit run, which I didn't want to do. I'm going to stop my project and open that file up again. And we've got a few different ways to do this. Let's do this, open with Notepad. And I'm going to temporarily set this to 1, 0, and 1. And save this. Close it. And now when I run my project, since that's set to a checkbox type, I'm going to be able to see that I set that to 1, 0, and 1. And if I change these, let's say I do 1, 1, 0, and I go back to my text file here and open this with Notepad, you'll see that it wrote that 1, 1, and 0. So different way, different format of ways to use that. And that will work also with the class tag as well. So it's kind of a neat way to do that. So again, if you have any questions, put those into the chat panel or the Q&A panel. I'm going to move along a little bit now. Let's go back to my PowerPoint presentation. So I've already done the class. And in the recipe webinar, which I'm going to show you a slide on how you can get to that recipe webinar, we used a database for the recipe list, but we used a class tag source for the parameters and the values for the recipes. Now, normally within InduSoft Web Studio, there's a whole recipe management system, but we've had customers who wanted to use databases, and we used the grid object in that webinar and showed you how to use the grid object with a database as a source and class tag as a source for monitoring the parameters and the values of those recipes. So it's a real good way to talk about some VB scripts to manage that, some really good examples in that recipe webinar. So I've included that in a link in a slide that's a few slides to come towards the end. So the database source for the grid object lets you choose the connection and the table. And what I haven't done yet is let's make the database for this. And I'm going to start to populate this with some data in the background. So if I first go ahead and create that database, I'm going to open up Microsoft SQL Server Express and create a new database. So this is the management studio for this. I don't expect you to know a lot about databases, but what's really nice when you use the grid object, you don't have to know SQL to be able to use this. But if you do, as you can see in the tips and tricks that I'm going to show, it can become a very powerful object. So I'm going to connect to the database engine, and I'm going to create a brand new database, and we're going to call this Grid Webinar Afternoon. And we'll say OK. And right now there's no tables in there. But if we go back here and we go to, let's close this screen. Let's stop our project. And if we go into project options, we can set up a connection to that database. And if I knew that connection string, I could type it in here. But I'm going to use this wizard and create a connection to SQL Server. Click on Next. And here I'm going to go, okay, this is running on my local PC, and I'm going to connect to that SQL Express database. I'm going to use built-in Windows security, and then I'm going to say which database. Well, it's the database that we just connected to, or just created, which is Grid Webinar Afternoon. I can test my connection. I've got all the security credentials set up there, and so it created that connection string for me, which is very handy because I don't like to do that manually. So now we have a connection path to that database, to that provider. And what I can do is set up here in the trend task a way to log to that database. And you can see here it's going to use the project default that I just set up. It's going to automatically create a table name, in this case called Trend001. I could uncheck this and change this if I wanted to. But here we're just going to keep that all default, and it's going to create a Trend001 table in that database. And I want to log a new tag that I don't have created yet. So let's create that called temperature. And say OK, that'll just be an integer. And I'm going to have this log once per second, and it'll just log to that Trend001 table. And I don't have a way to change that. And normally, if you see me do presentations before, I'll often create a trend object on the screen and a slider that I move up and down. But I'm going to do something a little bit differently today. I'm going to create a background simulation script. I'm going to have that execute all the time. And we're going to say, OK, this will be the tag temperature is going to be equal to, we're going to use the built-in random function within InduSoft Web Studio. So since it's a InduSoft function, I have to precede it with a $, R-A-N, and you can see the IntelliSense found that for me, random. And that function will give me a number between 0 and 1, a fractional number. So I can just take this and multiply this by 100, and this is going to give me a value between 0 and 100. And when I change that value of temperature, and then once per second, this trend log will then log that temperature to that database. And when I run this, if we wait a few seconds, in the background, this is logging values to that database. And I'm talking and giving myself some time because if I expand this database, and if I come down here to grid webinar morning tables, it's made that table for me. And if I right click and edit the top 200 rows, we've only been doing this for 15 or 20 seconds or so. You can see that I've got all kinds of values in here. Let me get rid of some of this stuff off the screen. And so you can see that I've got a handful of values in here ranging from 0 to the upper 80s or so. There's a 99 in there, so a good range of numbers in there. And if I was actually to refresh this, in fact, let me just go to the top 1,000 rows, you're going to see that since I've been talking, it's still logging in the background. And there's a divider here. You can see that there's a lot more values in here. The columns that it created are the timestamp with milliseconds, and the temperature. Now, it got this temperature column from that trend log that I created. Basically, what it used was this name here, this tag name, as the name of the column that it's going to create. But I want to pay attention to a couple of things. I want to pay attention to this timestamp field, that column, and the temperature column. I'm going to use those. And I also want you to notice that this is in the background. This actually did a SQL select statement, and it selected the top 1,000 from the trend table. And this is the official SQL that generated this response. I'm going to pay attention to a few of these, and what I'm going to do is go back to my PowerPoint here. And so what happens when you use this grid object is it actually makes a SQL select statement in the background for you. And what happens is it hard codes the select and the from, but it uses your field names as your columns, and it uses the table name that you have here as your table name. So when it builds that SQL statement for you, if you want to know a little bit more about this SQL select statement, W3 Schools is a great reference for that. Let me open up that web page here. W3 Schools, I'm going to go to the select. And here you can learn a little bit more about this statement and how this works. They give you some really good examples. And so what this grid object is doing is it's hard coding the select and the from, and it's building this SQL query for you. And that actually happens behind the scenes. So when I log that, that's the information that you see. And to get that information back, that grid object will do that query. So let's go ahead and build that. Let's put another grid object down here, make it tied to the database. So we'll go text file, database. The data source settings are going to be the same project default provider settings here, but instead of the default table name, I'm going to use that trend 001 table name and say OK. And then I'll set up the columns here, and I want the time, and that field, if we go look at that in the database, is actually time_stamp. So if I use that, oops, sorry about that. Looks like I need to come down here and go time_stamp, and that is the data type of date time. And the next column that I want, I'm going to skip over the milliseconds. I want the label of degrees C, and that field name is temperature. And that is actually a numeric data type. And if I do this, it's going to actually issue that SQL statement behind the scenes. And I should be able to save this, run this. And there it's read from my database using that, again, that SQL statement behind the scenes. Now, if you're familiar with InduSoft Web Studio, you'll know a little bit about this output window. And I could go in here and set my database messages, insert date and time. And if I had any errors, this is critical to understand. If I had database error messages, those errors would appear here. But if I don't have error messages and the SQL statements are happening just fine, well, I don't see those messages here. Something that many of you may not be aware of, but one of our patents that we have for our database connectivity is to be able to connect from different operating systems. We actually use TCP/IP to send to what we call our Studio Database Gateway. And this Studio Database Gateway then takes those TCP/IP messages, converts them into SQL, and then interacts with the database. Now I can right-click on this here in my task manager, my taskbar, and unhide this, so I could actually get at the log. I'll show my log, and I'll show not only error messages, but all messages here. And so now, as that, if this works here, let's put this on always on top. Let's run this. And what you can see, this probably happened faster, this has made that select, and it's got the timestamp, and it's actually pulling this all in from the trend, and it pulled that all in and allowed me to then view that values here. So you can see that that query is actually going on behind the scenes. Now, what I wanted to show you, and this is where what I think is all the power of or more power than most people realize, is, as I just mentioned, this is kind of hard coding the select and the from, and it's using your field names or the columns and the table name as kind of variables that it's plugged into there. And we could put in the table name field, we could add a where condition in here. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this object over. And in addition to the table, I'm going to say, I'm going to add the rest of my SQL statement in here, where temperature is greater than 20. And I don't know if this is needs spaces in here or whatnot. So what I've done is in this table field, where it's normally looking at this table, I've added a where condition in here. And if this works, and one of the things I have to remember is to disable delimiters. And this is more of an advanced, or this is part of the advanced database configuration. And if I close my screen, save it, stop my runtime, and go into my default database, here under advanced, what happens is it puts delimiters, it wraps some of the contents of that SQL message so that it can tell when there's certain things in there. But for this type of statement, what I need to do is disable delimiters. And if I click on OK and now run this, what will happen is now you can see that these two tables look fairly similar at first glance, but you'll notice that there's nothing less than 20 in this one because I've told it everything greater than 20. So there's probably a few different lines. Right now there's 366 lines over here, and over here there's 400. So there's just around 100 or so values that are less than 20 in there, and I filter those out by using that SQL statement, that where clause, if you will. And then so what I wanted to do next when I started putting together this webinar is I wanted to take an average temperature. And when I started to do that, I actually kind of broke something a little bit. So I originally put the average inside of this just the temperature field. And if we go here on main, and let me move these around a little bit, and I'm going to put another copy of this grid object over here. And what I did is I went into the columns field, and I said, okay, for the temperature, I want to take the average. So what I did is I put in here AVG, I think it's AVG, and parenthesis, and at the end of this, I close the parenthesis. But this kind of breaks it because this doesn't make sense. I'm taking an average, which is going to return one temperature, but I still have the whole timestamp field. So that's going to kind of break that whole thing. And what we're going to get is, if I run this, I don't think I even get anything back because it's what it's doing here is it's telling me there's an error. Basically, because that average isn't being looked at for the entire list of things. So this error message tells me some good information. So by investigating this a little bit more, and I had one of my coworkers help me out here, I actually found out that we can do this if we do a group by. We take the average temperature and then take the timestamp, And so we can do this a couple of different ways. So I'm going to make a couple of buttons on here that set up group by. We're going to make a tag called group by. We're going to put that into the table field. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in here, and so for this object, we're going to take the table, and we're going to put a new tag in here inside of curly brackets. We're going to name this group by, G-R-O-U-P by, and say OK. And now I'm going to make a button over here that will say, button, and we'll say group by none. And I'll configure that. I forgot to do one thing here. So I need this to refresh, and I'm going to make a tag called reload. And so that tag will be an integer tag, and we'll allow that to reload. And so here on the group by none is we're going to set the group by tag, $group by. I could spell here, group by. And I don't have that tag yet, so let's do this. Let's put it in mixed case, UP by equals. And then I'm going to make this one, because this is going to group this with nothing, I'm going to make it just open quote, close quote, which is essentially a null. And then we're going to do the reload tag, and that's going to be equal to reload plus 1. And again, anytime we use a triggering mechanism, in this case the reload is just going to increment. As long as it's changing values, it's going to recognize this. If I right-click and check script, it's going to ask me to create that tag. Do you want to create that tag? Group by, we're going to say yes. It's going to be a string type tag, and say OK. And now, if I look at my PowerPoint, so we've got this done. We're going to make another one that's going to group this by date part, which this date part SQL command, the letter N, the lowercase letter n, means it's going to group it by minutes. And so if I take that group by, and you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to go into my PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to grab that text just so I don't mess this up here. And if I grab this, actually I can grab this whole thing here. And if I copy this button over here and change this to group by minutes, and in the command animation, paste that text in there. So we'll group it by the date part, N for minutes, in the timestamp column. What it's going to do is it's going to take that text and put it into the tag group by, and then we're going to use that inside of this curly brackets here. So it's going to group the settings there by the minute. And then the last thing that I want to do is I'm going to copy this button over and change this to hours. And as you can see here in the PowerPoint, the hours are just a little bit different, and I'm not sure why SQL does this, but instead of a lowercase n for minutes, it's 2 lowercase h's for hours. And so we can change this here. Instead of n, we'll change this to hh. And now, if we save this and run this, what I should be able to do is say, oh, what did I miss here? What did I miss? Let me expand this here a little bit so we can see this. Trend timestamp is invalid. Oh, because I didn't add the group into, no, I did that, group by. Oh, I didn't add the min into here. So I need to go back into that column. And let's just redock this down here, see if I can get that in there. And the piece that I missed is it's still confused because the average was on the temperature, but it didn't know what to do with the timestamp here. So let's set this up as min, and now you can do some logical grouping of that. And if we run this, I should be able to delete that, run this, and now we can see, okay, it's no filtering by minutes, by hours, and what else did I do wrong here? Keyword by, did I miss incorrect syntax near, oh boy, what did I do here? Group by dates. I must have put a space in there when I didn't need a space. So let's go back into here. Let's redock that. And here I put group by. And where did I add that? Here in the button. Group by. Group. I think I don't need a space there. I think that's my problem. I thought we actually had that working. Yeah, it's probably not right because I know I had that working before. Oops. Group by date part. So let's take a look and quickly do a Google search on this to see what the format of that is. And we'll see group by or date part. What did I mess up here? If anybody can see any issues with what I did, let me know. Let's pull this, can the value in the grid signed? Question is, can the value in the grid, so a question came in, slightly different. Can a value in the grid object be signed value? Absolutely, yes, it can be. And let me see if there's any other things in here. Nope. All right, so I thought I did this right. Let's try stopping my project, and probably because I didn't save my screen. Let's stop it. Let's run, see if that takes care of it. So there's group by none, group by minutes. No, that still doesn't work. Group by hours. All right, incorrect keyword by. So it's got something to do with that word by in there. And group by. Let's see. So I did group by, and group by equals that, group by equals that. Oh, let's see, what did I miss? Date part. Well, I have another example of this, and so I should be able to show you that. So there's group by, min, timestamp, and look one more time here. Yeah, I don't know what I missed, but fortunately I have another example of this. We did this, got this working, so here was GridDB example. So the same text in here, the same idea. Apologize for this, not sure what I missed, but the same idea was done here where we did group by the minutes, which is the lowercase n, and the hour, reload, and so let's see if this works. Run this. And so here was, and now this is a different database, but the same idea. So if I group by none, if I group by minute, then the average for that minute comes in here, and then by hour. I did this morning. You can see those are those averages. But the real thing that I wanted to stress is this concept here, where inside of those column fields or inside of the table name fields is you can put some additional SQL information in there and get some real powerful sorting. Let's say you wanted to sort ascending or descending. Well, you can put that right into the column field there, and that will allow you to expand on the SQL capabilities that's happening behind the scenes, because that select and that from and the comma here is kind of hard-coded into that command. Well, you can take advantage that the columns and the table names have additional space in those fields, and you can put additional stuff in there. So that was the real thing that I wanted to point out. And let's see if we can get this working in a SMA browser. So there's a couple of steps that I need to take here. This was in the other one. Let's go back into the project that we were working with here, Grid Webinar Afternoon. What I'll do is I'll straighten out this application before I post it to make sure it works, and post that up online here. So let's see. So the screen here, I need to first publish this. So let's publish, save that as HTML, and once that's done, I can now go here in my Thin clients, open up my mobile access, and once I open this up, I really don't have to make any changes, because what this will do is this will enable my mobile access task to run. And when I then run my project, once that's running, I should be able to see that my mobile access task is running. So that's going to allow me to get at those screens with browser. So here I'm going to open up Chrome, and I'm going to point to this link here, which is explained in many other webinars in our documentation. So it's going to open up the screen called Main. And if I just do this, now this is going to take a second. I don't know what's going on my PC, but this takes a few seconds. But when this opens up, this is going to first challenge us for security. I don't have any security on this project, so I'm just going to click OK to continue. And this will open up the project here, the screen. Give me a second here. Apologize for this. I put my laptop through all kinds of tests, and I'm not sure what I have going on here, but this will take us just a second. For you, probably won't take that long. Say OK here. And now what I wanted to point out, these top two are the grid object for the text and the class tag. And in the SMA client, that is not supported. Only the database data source is supported. So here you can see the first one that I did and the second one, and those are tied to a database. So that's what I mean by must be database data source. So with that, we're going to open it up for, one more, which is the recipe webinar. And in this webinar, there was an example of using the grid for recipes. And if I take a look at how to find all the webinars on the InduSoft website, if I just go to the InduSoft web page here and go to Support Video Library Webinars. So again, that's Support Video Library Webinars. Here you can see a list of all of our different webinars in chronological order and then by categories. And this recipe management one here was done just a couple of weeks ago, and goes through how to do recipes with the built-in recipe functions and by using databases and grid objects, and some really neat VB script code to do that. So there's an example of that if you want some good examples. So with that, we'll open it up for questions, and maybe we'll open it up for questions. One of the questions that came in was, can a value in the grid be a minus temperature in the absolute question? I think I answered this before, but the answer is yes. I don't see any other questions. Hopefully this was a good webinar and gave you some good information. If you need to get a hold of us from a sales or product-related question, just info@InduSoft. You can get a hold of our support team, support@InduSoft. You can chat with us live on our website or give us a call. There's some different phone numbers there for us. Hopefully you know how to get a hold of us if you're interested in our product. And since there's no other questions in, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. And I really appreciate everybody's time. Don't forget to fill out that survey, and hopefully give you some good ideas on how to use that grid object a little bit more interesting than what you have been in the past, and take advantage of that if you know some SQL. Again, take a look at the W3 Schools page, because really what that gives you the capability is of doing, if I didn't point that out, is not only this select statement, but now you can build all kinds of these things. You can sort values, you can do mins and max, sums, counts, averages automatically with this just by building those additional text inside those table fields or column fields. And so another question came in, is it possible to edit SQL entries from the grid? It's not possible to edit unless you're talking about what I'm showing here, which is in the column and in the the table fields. But there's a couple of different ways to do that. So if you wanted to get that data, not necessarily related to the grid, there is a few different ways to do that. One of the ways would be if you're using, let's see, it's here under tasks. If you, instead of using the default database configuration, you can use insert a connection. Oops, sorry, let's back this up here. We'll insert a connection, and very similar to that connection that I created before. If I wanted to go to that same database, I could do local SQL Express and Windows Security. Let's point it to that same database, which is the Grid Webinar Afternoon. And we'll give this a name. We'll just call it DB for database. And now here in this database ERP, I have the choice of using this named connection that I just created. And I could go right to a table here, or I can use SQL and I can build a SQL statement right in here and pull those values right into tags. That's one way to do that if you're not using the grid. So further information similar to how we were able to edit the data of the CSV. Oh, are you talking about, hopefully this maybe answers your question. So if you were on one of these screens, and I thought you were talking about editing the actual SQL. So for example, the value at 831 or 2031 is a value of 80, and let's maybe make that 123. And if I was to go back into that database and be able to find that, I'm not sure if I will be able to find that. And it looks like it might be that one right there at the top. And if I just refresh this, yeah, there it is, 123. Hopefully that's what you're talking about, is being able to edit the entries, the data. Now that I read your question, I was kind of off answering the wrong question. Just like that. Perfect. Good. Thank you for the feedback. Another question came in. Is it possible to run two different databases at the same time? It absolutely is. So what I just did here in the database connections, or the database ERP, is I created a connection to one database that I named DB. And in this case, this connection points to that same database that I just set up, that afternoon webinar. If you wanted to create another connection, I could say DB2, let's say, and point it to an entirely different database, and then use that named connection to reference that database in an entirely different way. So some good comments, some good feedback. Appreciate that. Thank you. Hopefully, I'm glad we were able to answer your questions. I don't see any other questions in, and that looks like about it. We're right at the top of the hour, so don't know how I managed to do that. Amazingly planned, exactly an hour webinar. So with that, thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest. Again, fill out that survey. Let us know how we did today. Let us know if you're looking for other types of information. Thanks for the feedback. You're very welcome. Really appreciate that, everybody. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this afternoon's webinar. Look for the recording of this, hopefully with a modified and fully working project up on the website just in a couple of days. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you in the next InduSoft webinar. Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.